let's look at some of the pledges you've announced already. A 25% cut in NHS managers. How many people will lose their jobs?
Well, firstly, we've got a policy of no compulsory redundancies in the health service, but there are around 1,200 senior managers in the NHS, so a 25% cut will see between 300 and 400 of them reduce over the period of the next Parliament. I value the work that managers in our health service do. The health service is well managed, and that's why we've got the lowest waiting times on record, for example. But at a time when budgets are tight, I think everybody would accept that we have to direct as much of our resources as possible to frontline patient care, and that's exactly what the SNP will do.
So if this is about natural wastage rather than compulsory redundancies, there's the danger you won't reach your target.
Well, you know, we have reached all of our NHS targets over the past 3.5 years, and we intend to do so again if we are re-elected. The reason I'm setting out now that target to reduce senior management in the health service by 25% is exactly so that the health service has time to adapt to that change. It's the right thing to do. It's about directing resources to the front line, and in times of tight budgets it is absolutely appropriate that we do so.
But having been Health Secretary for over 3 years now, there is an argument that says that if the health service could manage efficiently without such a large management, then frankly, why have you done it before now?
Well, we have been seeing management reduced in the health service, but given the change in the financial climate, I think it's time to accelerate that process. Now, let's not forget that as a government we're making a very important commitment to the health budget, that we'll pass on the proceeds of any rise in NHS spending south of the border to the NHS in Scotland. That means that at a time when there are going to be significant cash cuts in our budget overall in Scotland, we won't be cutting in cash terms the budget of the National Health Service. But everybody knows that the inflationary pressures on the National Health Service are significant. So the Health Service will require to make efficiency savings in order that it can live within its budget, but I'm determined it does so in a way that protects frontline patient care.
We're expecting the First Minister this afternoon to flag up an intention potentially to amalgamate police forces. How many jobs will go as a result of that?
Well, it will surprise you to know, Gary, that I'm not going to preempt the First Minister's speech this afternoon. I'm sure you'll listen carefully to that. What the First Minister will say, though, and again, you know, I think this is something that people across the country will agree with, that at times of tight budgets, then we have to focus on the front line, and the number of bobbies on the beat, the number of police in our streets, I think matters more to people than the boundaries between police forces. So I'm not going to preempt the speech any more than that, but the central message is that when budgets are tight, we need to direct as much resources as possible to the front line. That's what we're doing in health, and it's what we'll continue to do in the fight against crime. And remember, over the past 3.5 years, we've put 1,000 extra police officers on the streets of Scotland already. But
it's fair to sum up your philosophy during this these times of austerity to be that actually you would rather jobs were cut than people pay more for services.
I think that's an absolutely preposterous thing to say, and it's certainly not the position of the SNP government. You know,
but you've announced spending commitments in the last few days, which mean that people who perhaps could pay more for their council tax or their prescriptions won't have to. But you've also announced, and you've just told us here, that jobs will have to go.
Well, you know, these budget cuts are not of our making, but it is our responsibility to steer Scotland through this. And what we have to do is obviously ensure that we balance the budget, but ensure that we have efficient public services. And, you know, I've already referred to the policy that the SNP government has had for the past 3.5 years of no compulsory redundancies, giving people job security while the public services become more efficient, as they must do. But we also have to ensure fairness for people whose own personal and family budgets are very tight. And during this conference, I think we've set out the terms of the next election. We think it's wrong when people are facing increases in VAT, national insurance, inflation, when we're seeing, rightly, wage restraint, that they're also hit with increases in their council tax. So we are absolutely determined to see a freeze in the council tax for the next 2 years. But
do you think, I wonder whether
I
wonder whether you think that those NHS managers, well-paid NHS managers who will lose their jobs, or those backroom staff in the police who will lose their jobs, would rather pay more for the council tax than be on the dole?
Well, I speak to people right across the country in the public sector and the private sector, many pensioners, many people on very low wages who absolutely do not want to see a rise in the council tax. Let's never forget that when Labour were last in office in Scotland, council tax went up by 60%, and it's not a fair tax, it's regressive. It has no relationship to the ability to pay, so the higher it goes, the more unfair it becomes. it's correct, in my view, to say that we want to freeze the council tax. If others want to increase the council tax, like Labour appear to do, then I think it's for them to say by how much do they want the council tax to go up. But the point I was coming on to make is that we're also the only party going into this election with an alternative vision for the future of Scotland. The only alternative to a decade of damaging cuts is to give ourselves the economic powers that will allow us to grow our economy faster, increase our revenues, and not need as many cuts as we would have under the other parties.
Let me just ask you on a final point. We've got a newspaper story today saying that Donald Trump was told by government officials that after councillors turned down his golf development for the first time, that he should carry on because he would win. Do we need an inquiry into contact between the government and Mr Trump?
Well, there's already been a parliamentary inquiry. That's emphatically not true. There was no such contact with the government. There was nothing of that nature said by anybody in the government. It's well known that Alex Salmond, as the local MSP, not as First Minister, was and is supportive of the development. But the reports you refer to are absolutely untrue.
Nicola Sturgeon, thanks for joining us from Perth this afternoon.